this is amazing. That the things you're reading, medical things, you're reading all kinds of research to prepare a sermon. Wow.
But I'm afraid to use the $5 words because I feel like I only had a $2 education. And that's not a teacher's fault. That's not a school's fault. That's maybe a bad way, but that it was a disability that I had that we didn't know. And again, if for those of you out there that actually have a disability, I would not want to offend you by me saying that, and I've never said that about myself.
But it actually, it's a kind of a reading disability, you know, with your ears, and but your sermons are so rich and deep.
When you can't help your 6-year-old son phonetically spell something out, I actually, let me go ahead and say this, and for those watching, it's going to make you do one of two things. Either retreat with shame or rise up with the desire to overcome. And if you're watching this right now, I would say my personal testimony is this: it's worth rising up and overcoming.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Linda Mitchell, and I want to thank you for joining me on Literacy Journeys with Linda. I am so excited about my guest today. His name is David Amsden, and he is a pastor of Navigation Church in Collinsville, Illinois. Welcome. Thank you, Pastor David, for joining me today.
I have been looking forward to this, been excited about this conversation. I love watching the past interviews and, of course, some of the people I know.
Yes, you
and
do.
So,
maybe a few relatives.
yeah. So to have some insight, to be able to know what you're doing, I'm telling you, been looking forward to this. A little nervous, but looking forward to it.
Well, I'm nervous. No, we're not going to be nervous because we know each other. I just had to talk to you because I'm so impressed with your sermons. And I want to ask you, how can you, or is it possible to be an effective pastor if you aren't literate? How would you do that?
When you, just a little, behind the scenes here, you at least gave me a heads up on what the opening question was.
Yeah.
And so I guess my question for you is, what is the definition of literacy?
Literacy, I'm just keeping it real simple. It's the ability to read and write and comprehend.
Okay. So for me, as I thought about that question, what many people probably don't know is there's many ways that I'm actually not literate.
Oh.
And here's what I mean by that.
Okay.
Gosh, I can feel the emotions coming up just having to tell this story.
Let it go.
So when I was a kid, I had water on my ears. And what mom and dad didn't know it, because as I was progressing through school, I was doing okay. But then there came an age where I went, specifically when it came to my spelling, reading, that I was not progressing. And one of my teachers ended up realizing that I was memorizing everything and not learning specifically my phonics because I couldn't hear it. So the reason I ask you what's the definition of literacy is I don't know my phonics at all. You know, when you open a dictionary and those little parentheses, I have no idea what any of that means. And the way this story really hit home with me was, so
it's okay. You didn't know that it was going to be this emotional for you.
Yeah. So one of my kids came home and they were having to learn their phonics. And they started asking me questions. And Cammie heard me trying to explain phonics to them, and she had to step in because I was teaching them how I phonetically look at words versus actually how to sound something out.
Wow. Can you give me an example?
Yeah, so if I'm reading something and I don't know a word, in my brain, I have to say, what does this word look like? Like, is there another word that I know that I can parallel to this word?
Wow, that's difficult.
Yeah. And then when it comes to Sunday morning specifically, and I have to do a sermon, if there's a large word that I need to do, I will write it out the way I phonetically hear it in my own head. And so pick a big word. Pick any big word, and let me see if we can do this off the cuff.
Oh, no. Evangelist.
So, okay, so I would write out the word E dash. What's the next thing I hear is van, V-A-N. I know van, that's an easy one. Evangel. So what does J look like to you? To me, it looks like J-A-Y.
Oh.
Evangel, and then list, L-I-S-T. So if it was a big word that I didn't know, that I had to say in front of people, I would actually have to write it out that way in order for my brain, for me to be able to phonetically and to pronunciate it correctly.
Okay.
And so when you say, how important is it to be literate, I would almost maybe ask a question back is, how important is it to overcome your obstacles
Yes.
in order to be able to be self-sufficient by reading?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so I can't tell you how often I have to, hey Siri, what does this word mean? Or hey, how do you pronounce this? I know this sounds weird, but you can just about YouTube any word out there, and there's a little 15-second clip.
And so those are your tools. That's what you go to.
It's how I have to. So if I was, one of my dreams in life, like if I wasn't a pastor, the one thing I would love to be is a professional MC. And I'm about to drop a name on you. Ryan Seacrest.
Yes.
He's a master. He's the best out there. And of course, before then, when it came to the New Year's Eve,
Dick Clark.
Dick Clark, you knew who I was going. Who I was going with, because these guys are always in control, but never the main thing.
Right.
Passing it along, doing what they need to. But my biggest fear of being an MC is to be handed a name or a piece of paper that I wasn't able to read to ahead of time, and have to immediately know how to pronunciate something correctly. So if you were, I've been asked to do what is it, where they get groups of teens together around tables and ask questions.
Moderate. Okay. Yeah,
like
moderation. Okay.
And I always would recruit someone to be there with me, because I knew there would be words that I'd run into that I didn't mentally know what they were, and I have no idea how to phonetically spell them out. So I would say to you, to answer your original question, I think literacy is so important, because being literate means that you have there's nothing in life that can stop you other than your drive to read what you want to know.
Wow.
But when the obstacle itself is reading, are you still willing to overcome it in order to gain the knowledge you desire?
That's right. And then you have found a way to use those tools. Now, of course, your main textbook is the Bible, which many people say, okay, that's not an easy book.
No.
You're talking about big words that are difficult to comprehend.
Now, can I go ahead and tell you one secret? When you read the Bible, here's for everyone watching.
Come on now.
Here's one secret. When you get to the names of the people,
woo!
However you say it,
Methuselah.
say it like you own it.
Methuselah.
That's it. All you gotta do is when you get to names of people, however you say it like you own it.
Okay.
And no one knows if you're right or wrong, because everyone pronounces it. Listen to how T.D. Jake pronounces a name like Joseph.
Yeah.
Versus, let's say, like a white pastor, and everyone has their own spin on it. So all you gotta do on names is say it like you own it, and everyone will believe you. Wow. So that's a trade secret right there.
But I know that you've also, just something I know about you, that you have a degree, a master's degree in theology. Is that what you say what it is? I don't know.
It's a master's degree in theology.
Okay.
It's from Christian Life School of Theology, who eventually became Beacon University.
Okay.
I could have transferred all my credits and done additional schooling for additional degrees. But what I found for myself is anytime I have to get into scholastic type education,
yes,
I did not thrive. Because you hand me this book, here's my assignment, here's what you have to learn, I found no life there. But if you told me, hey, I will give you X amount of credits Find someone in the Bible that intrigues you, that you don't know nothing about, but there's something about their story you want to know more of, that I'll read night and day. I'm a very topical reader, but there has been one discipline that I actually started earlier this year, which oddly enough, I've read 13 books up to date. So what, in 5 months, read 13 books at this point. But I read one chapter every morning, a part of my devotion. So I get up in the morning, I work out early in the morning. So I get up, I take some pre-workout stuff, I read, and then I head to the gym, and one chapter a day. And what I do is I pick books I normally wouldn't read.
Oh, so, that's interesting.
Yeah. So
why are you doing that?
To expand.
Yes.
Here's if you only read what you only know what you've only read.
Exactly.
So I've read business books, I've read leadership books, read an absolutely fascinating book, and this one is theology that I'll never preach. Sorry for those watching, if you tune in on Sunday morning, you won't hear this because it was such nerdy Bible stuff. But here's what the guy did, is he wrote a 400-page book on the lens that most modern American Western cultured Christians read the Bible through, versus the lens of what your early followers of Christ would have thought about Old Testament text and New Testament text. And the spiritual side of it, it's called the unseen realm. And when I got done reading it, my first thought was, how much of the Bible have I misread over time? And so I never would have picked that book up, other than saying, okay, what's a book I normally wouldn't pick up? So in doing one chapter a day, I pick up a book I normally wouldn't pick up. And again, it could be a leadership book. I read a book called Traction. If I had a young person come to me right now and say, I want to start a business, I'm going to go to college for it, I would actually challenge them to say, read this book first.
Yeah, it might save a lot of money.
It could save a whole lot of money. So from what makes me better as a person, but then also what is it that I can also use as a lead pastor, as someone who has to oversee and motivate not just employees but volunteers. But then what are things that would just make me as a better person, even as a preacher? And so for me, it's that daily discipline of every single morning I just read, and that does not count Bible reading that I do. That's outside of that.
Okay. Well, in light of what you explained before about your struggles or challenges, obstacles that you have to overcome.
That's a great way to say it.
I can't imagine how you get through all these books. And you're saying, Siri, how do you pronounce this? How do you pronounce that? You're Googling things. That is a lot of material that you have to overcome. Or is it getting easier?
Absolutely getting easier. So one, the amount of words that I'm exposed to. And so I don't know how you are with reading. There's some people that read something and they can tell you page, paragraph, and exactly what it was. I hate those people.
It's not.
So for me, what I have found is quantity is better than quality. So the more I dump in, after it filters through my conscious to my unconscious, the more I dump through, more gets to that unconscious realm to me. And so absolutely, right now, if you and I sat down, I'm going to know, if you ask me to read out loud, I'm going to know what it takes to make that sound the best. If you want me just to read something, I know what I need to do in order just to comprehend it. So one of the things I found in reading are, for me, also ways to more quickly read through a book. And so, for example, if it's a theological book, where I'm reading this paragraph, but I'm not really sure what it says, I've found that if I read through the chapter, I usually can understand the broad picture of what someone's trying to say, which makes it easier to go back to understand the individual points.
Okay.
But then there's other times where I will read a book, and so for instance, someone makes a point and they say, debt is bad and having excess funds are good. So that's a concept we all understand.
Sure.
So let me tell you a story about Linda and how she came to understand this. I usually jump forward a paragraph or two. And the reason why is I appreciate the personal story, but if I understood your point already, I don't need to have it reinforced with it. So there's times that I'll actually skip some of those stories.
Oh.
But
I love the stories.
if I'm not, but if I'm not understanding the point, I absolutely read the story because that usually drives the point home. And I'll just go ahead and tell you, I found a lot of times if it's a book done by a publisher, usually the last 2 or 3 chapters are pretty milquetoast because they had a certain page number they had to get to, and I got to the point already. So those are a couple of things that I found in my readings.
And I like that you use that word understanding, because I'm thinking about your congregation, and you've got all kinds of educational levels in the congregation. Do you keep that in mind when you're developing your sermons on how to take these concepts and whittle them down so that people can understand? Not to give people milk, but some meaty concepps.
So actually, I would use both those terms. I believe I have people at church. Not I believe. I know factually. There are people at the church that need milk, but then like yourself, a 30
seasoned.
A seasoned someone who's been around Christ, the Bible, church for a long time. So my goal in every single sermon is to be able to give milk and meat. And here's the thing. Sometimes milk, even to someone who's been very seasoned, is still refreshing. But at the same time, for the people who need the meat, want the meat, and can handle the meat, someone who's only on milk, I think it actually entices their appetite to want more. And so an ideal sermon is for someone who's been at church for a day and someone who's been at church for a day and 10 years, both to say to me, wow, did I get something out of that? And the way to do that is you have to be educated on a subject. I think people who come across as educated, but everyone says to them, I have no idea what they're talking about.
Yes.
I actually think they don't have a depth of knowledge. Because I should, when Mariah, so for those who don't know, I have 4 kids, a 12, a 10, and 8, all boys, and then my baby girl, Mariah, 5. I should be able to explain the same thing to my 12-year-old as I do my 8-year-old at different levels and different revelation. But if I truly understand, if it's how to kick a soccer ball to why did Jesus die for us, if you have a good enough depth of revelation, you should be able to explain that, which you do see in books when they're able to not only give a point, but explain it from those different facets, from those different angles. I think it's beautiful. So yes, being able to communicate with anyone of any culture, of any education level is absolutely a desire. And I would say even an ideal sermon goes into how do I communicate to the different personalities that are out there too. Now, impossible to do every sermon.
But it's please everybody.
You can't. But you have those, just give me the facts. You have those that want to be inspired by a story.
Yes.
You have those that are random, that you need to say something random to get their attention to give a point home. So for me, a quality sermon, let's say the sermon's going to be 35, 40 minutes long. If I can't define it for you in a single sentence, I don't think I'm ready to preach yet.
Ooh, that's tough. That's like a thesis statement.
But I heard someone say one time, if you need me to preach an hour, give me 5 minutes. If you need me to preach 5 minutes, give me an hour.
Ooh, okay.
Because it's harder to be more succinct.
Exactly.
Which my last answer was very long, so I don't know if it was succinct or not.
One of my favorite scriptures is, oh gosh, I don't remember the address, but in all thy getting, get understanding. And I love that. That's what literacy does to me. When people can read and write, they can understand things.
Absolutely.
And so
no one can hold them back.
You bring that enlightenment when you're able to read and write and comprehend. And I wanted to talk about the writing of your sermons. How do you, I was going to say navigate. That's the name of your church, navigation.
Hey, I'll take the free plug. navchurch.org. There you go.
How do you handle that? How do you do your writing of your sermons?
So the first thing that has to happen, and this may, if you're listening, Linda, right now, and you're not a spiritual person, this may sound odd to you. But first thing is, I have to know what I'm supposed to communicate for God. That's going to, honestly, the first and foremost. Here's just, I'm going to do a 90-second side note spiritually. So you remember when the children of Israel were in the desert and every day they had to go out and get manna?
Sure.
But if they ever got twice as much, in order to be lazy the next day, it was rotten.
Absolutely.
Right, except for one day a week during the Sabbath where they weren't allowed to. So what I have found is it doesn't have to be new bread, it just has to be fresh bread.
Yes.
So step number one is what am I called to by God on this day to communicate? Second thing that I'm going to do is I got to get my head around the whole story. What is it that I'm trying to communicate? And so like for this next week, here's the big, I believe in life we choose our misery. You either choose it on the front side or it's given to you on the back side. That's my big picture for this coming Sunday. Like I can summarize it like that. But in order to tell you that single sentence, now it came because while in the Word, reading in 1 Kings chapter 20, I went, man, this king, if he would have done it right, he might have been miserable right here, but now he's going to be miserable on the backside. So number one, I get the broad picture. Okay. What is it that I'm supposed to say? Number two, where is it in the scripture that I pull principles out of? And then three, eventually it's the how am I going to process people through this thought with me? Which, by the way, any author of any book does.
Right.
If you've ever read a book that seems like it's just a shotgun of thoughts, it's hard to get through and you usually don't. But most authors, the reason they have it broken out in those chapters is in order for you to understand chapter 3, we need to set a base of understanding in chapter 1. If it's a fictional book, I need to set up my characters.
Absolutely.
Right? And before I get through my, 3 stages of my 3 scenes that I'm going to process. So a sermon's going to be built the same way a book does, and actually.
So are you writing or doing all this on your computer, your laptop, or?
So if I would drop off tomorrow and someone had to pick up my sermon notes, it would not be a good thing. It would not be a good thing.
Wow.
So I've had to become a lot more disciplined as far as writing out my sermons. Because nowadays, and again, this is another cheap plug, but if you download our app, you can see we have sermon notes in it. Because of the online that we do, because of the sermon notes that we do, and because of the nav groups that we do, I have to provide a lot more of my content up front. But when it comes to my actual sermon notes, I actually preach off bullet points. And I have found that if I try to write out everything I want to say, it doesn't come across as, even though they're my words, it doesn't come across as natural. Because when it comes to preaching, I'm actually a live audience person. If you're talking, we're talking. And like any conversation, it becomes very organic. But if I had to just read my sermon every week, my wife wouldn't even want to listen to it. Like it would be hard. So when it comes time to me actually preaching, I'm actually a bullet point guy.
Now, would we be able to read your sermons? Are you writing them out phonetically, or? If
I have words that I need to try to hit, absolutely. But I'll tell you now. So there was it would have been Good Friday service. Good Friday service. I did all the research. When it says that Jesus sweated, that he actually had blood, his sweat was that of blood, or that he actually sweat blood.
Yeah.
Of course, I wanted to find out could this even be true? So I went and did research, and absolutely there is a physiological thing.
I think you called it something.
Yeah. So I remember backing off of that word big time, because even though I practiced it, so I remember it being hemo, which is blood.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was some type of word close to sweating. So, but I actually remember backing off of that word because I was afraid to say it out loud, because I wasn't sure I could nail it. Even though I had studied it, even though I knew what it was, I can tell you that the blood vessels closest to your forehead rupture, and so that bleeds into your sweat glands. Like, I can tell you everything I remember from it, but coming out with that big word, I remember chickening out and not doing it.
Well, this is amazing. That the things you're reading, medical things, you're reading all kinds of research to prepare a sermon. Wow.
But I'm afraid to use the $5 words because I feel like I only had a $2 education. And that's not a teacher's fault. That's not a school's fault. That's maybe a bad way, but that it was a disability that I had that we didn't know. And again, if for those of you out there that actually have a disability, I would not want to offend you by me saying that, and I've never said that about myself.
But it actually, it's a kind of a reading disability, you know, with your ears and. But your sermons are so rich and deep.
When you can't help your 6-year-old son phonetically spell something out. I actually, let me go ahead and say this, and for those watching, it's going to make you do one of two things. Either retreat with shame or rise up with the desire to overcome. And if you're watching this right now, I would say my personal testimony is this: it's worth rising up and overcoming. And I should be embarrassed to say that you put a word in front of me and have me phonetically spell it out. If I don't know words that look alike, I'm going to get it wrong every time. I can see why someone would say you should be embarrassed about that. But guess what? It's the hand I was dealt. And so I can either play with the cards in my hand, or I can blame. You know, I can. There's a lot of places we could go with that as far as making it someone else's fault. But at the end of the day, either I have to own what I have.
Yeah. Well, I want to wrap up with you telling me about why you think literacy is important, not just for you as a pastor to prepare a sermon, but just for people in general.
I think literacy is complete freedom.
Whoa.
And here's why I would say that. And again, there's a chance I'll text you later today and say, hey, can we refilm
I'm
that?
excited because my tagline is literacy is liberation. It takes you higher.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
So
it's wonderful.
When I say complete freedom, nowadays when it comes to, I'll say it, when it comes to our media, I don't know who to trust and who not to trust, what has a spin, what doesn't have a spin, but I do know this: I can go read 10 different sources and probably find my own truth. When it comes to the Word of God, there's been times that I've heard a sermon that I just go, really, that's what that means? And if I didn't know how to read, I just have to take the pill they're telling me to swallow, but I can get in it for myself and I can start finding the freedom. When I have a new toy that I have to put together, and the only thing I want to do is invent a new cuss word. but I can pull out something as simple as directions and begin reading that. And now I have the Barbie house for my daughter, right? I would say when it comes to literacy, I have a freedom to go to any world that I want to, if it be fiction or nonfiction. I have the ability to find out about great men and women of the past, and I don't have to rely on a director, a producer, a Hollywood studio giving me their version of it, but I can read autobiographies, I can read history, I can read newspapers. And so just the answer off the top of my head is, I think the reason it's so important is you have freedom to find out truth for yourself.
As far as your 4 children, are you planting the seeds of literacy into them, making sure that they read and write and understand?
Yeah, so not only are we planting the seed, like one of our sons, we feel like when watching him read, there's, let me just use the word triggers. There's things I see him doing that I feel like I did.
Oh.
So like this summer, we've already hired a reading tutor for all summer long, which is a couple $100 expense.
Okay,
But here's the thing. Name a better investment than your kids. Right? Name a better investment than having literacy there. And so one of our kids, and it's interesting because they immediately went to, oh, I'm dumb, or I'm not smart.
No.
And you go, hey buddy, like when we did extra, for instance, soccer practices, or you went to a camp, did you ever say the phrase, I'm no good at soccer?
Mm-hmm.
So how is this anything different where we want you just to be the best that you can be? So what we find ourselves is always reframing their worldview to a healthy one.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? When I needed help physically, I had no shame going to a doctor. I have a front headlight out in my van right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to learn how to change a light bulb, and there's people watching now that know how to. I have no problem asking my friend who takes care of our cars, hey, will you take this to work one day, charge me $20 and change it out?
Mm-hmm.
But somehow when we have some type of mental or emotional deficit, we're ashamed or embarrassed to ask for help. It's foolishness.
And pride.
And pride. So let's do this. How about we strip down all of our walls and just say, hey, I'm not a complete person and I'm not perfect. Any chance you want to help me in my imperfection?
Mm-hmm.
And man, I just think even as culture, as friends, as lovers with your spouse, those intimate people that you're with, the more we can strip down the pride of life, which by the way, for biblically speaking, is one of the 3 things that Jesus had to overcome. That's how hard this is, the pride of life. If we're able just to strip that down and say, listen, I'm incomplete here, can I get additional help? But I think marriages fall apart because we're afraid to either pick up a book or pick up a phone. I think finances fall apart all around America all the time because we won't pick up a book or pick up a phone. But if we can just say, hey, I need some help in these places where I'm incomplete, and if literacy was on the top of that list, a generation from now we'd be different.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me on Literacy Journeys with Linda. Thank you, Pastor David.
Thank you for
spending
asking me to do this.
Time with me. This is just such an important topic. You know, literacy, reading, writing, understanding, because we can understand people, we can understand life, and like I said, we can move forward. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.